I'm Victor Navarro, and I will talk about the conceptualization and the making of photosynthetic patterns, an audiovisual art project in which I seek to investigate cinema as a medium. Where does cinema start? How does it influence us? Can cinema be an analogy of life? Photosynthetic Patterns started from the interest of exploring the physical nature of cinema, revealing the mechanic instability and the sensitivity of the materials, understanding the technology that gives life to the medium, from the necessity to demystify it so we can better understand it from a different angle, give new meaning to it by returning to a primal state of cinema. More than 100 years after the invention of cinema, we live in a virtualized world in which the fabrication of reality depends on inscrutable digital processes, looking for efficiency, accuracy, resolution. To capture the essence of cinema, I decided to use 16mm projector and film. Film is the canvas in which the cinematographic expression is transmitted. This film is made of plastic. Every particle that sticks to this canvas is projected. Friction sculpts it. The shadow of every event in the film is projected, and we identify it as an image. Our mind ignores the light and focuses on the shadow. Silence and the absence of shadows is where we begin to construct cinema. The projector runs the film so that the shadows it projects create the movement effect. This mechanical acceleration is what turns this canvas invisible to the spectator into the visible. When light is shined on it, it stops being the creator's secret and it transforms into a rectangle of light and shadows that move. Nowadays, we have learned to decode that incandescent rectangle as a spectacle that deserves our attention. That hidden creator intervened the film for a reason. But is cinema just light and shadows? Cinema started as moving photography, but soon it integrated sound into the image, first by playing live music with the projections, and afterwards by recording audio into the film. After adding human voices and sounds from the environment, cinema established itself as an analogy of life. When we watch moving shadows and we hear their movement, we get caught in the illusion that what's happening in front of us is real. In our world, when something moves, it changes air pressure, and very likely we can hear the movement that we see. I wanted to investigate further into this synchronization between image and sound. My intention with photosynthetic patterns was to go back to the foundation of film, not in a historical sense, but in a methodological way. Because of that, I had to discard photography. Cinema can exist regardless of photography. A camera is not needed to create cinema. Audio and image can be produced directly on film. The course of this project was determined when I thought of the film and projector system as a photosynthesizer. It came up from combining two concepts: optical sound and audio synthesis. On one hand, audio synthesis consists on creating sound not with acoustic sources, but with electricity. This generates an analogy of a sound wave, a fluctuation that propagates through space. The number of cycles in a wave is the frequency. On the other hand, optical sound is a translation from light to sound on a film projector. A light bulb casts shadows from the soundtrack area of the film into a photocell. The photocell translates light into voltage. An amplifier gives power to the voltage, so it can be translated into acoustic vibrations. By performing experiments of laser printing directly on the film, I found that to generate a tone, that is, a fixed frequency in the spectrum, I needed to create a pattern in which the visual quality would have an effect on the sonic quality. When the pattern passes through the optical sensor, sound waves are generated, just like in audio synthesis. At this point, it was necessary to establish a structure, just like in any movie. Once sound became the main element and the image the secondary element, it made sense to think in terms of a musical notation rather than in terms of a script. Math is the language of nature, but also the language of computers. Photosynthesis in plants is the process in which light energy is transformed into chemical energy. A photosynthesizer could also be described as an analog computer that in this particular case turns light energy into acoustic energy. An analog computer models a physical phenomenon so that it can express a mathematical logic from it. Unlike digital computers, which use fixed numbers, analog computers use continuous values, infinite. Relating nature and computers through math, it became clear that I needed to apply a mathematical sequence to organize notes across time. The Fibonacci sequence is a mathematical pattern that can be found in plant growth, as well as in many other forms of life on Earth. In this progression, every new number is the sum of the previous two, to infinity. The sequence determined the general structure of the piece in a graphical way, so it could create the metrics necessary to spread the notes. The patterns could move throughout the film, growing like a leaf on a plant. But the pattern still needed to be figured out. Game of Life is a computer game based on a mathematical model known as cellular automaton. On this one-player game, the evolution of a series of images depends on the initial rules set by the player before starting the game. The movement it generates, the mutation from one figure to the next, in a very basic way, resembles the movement of living organisms. So, Game of Life was helpful in two simultaneous ways: generating square waves and to ponder on growth and life cycles. 7 symbols were taken from Game of Life and put onto the visible area of film. These same symbols were then adjusted to the soundtrack area of the film, and then duplicated a certain number of times on each frame, turning them into patterns. When we run the film, the symbols are projected, and the patterns generate a tone when passing by the optical sensor. Wolfram tones are another kind of cellular automaton. In a similar way to Game of Life, certain rules are determined from the start, and they end up creating an image inside of a grid. An excerpt from this image is taken, in which every pixel is represented as either a note or a pause. A particular sequence was generated and then written on paper. It was then manually processed in the musical notation so that the acceleration was relative to the Fibonacci sequence. A new sequence with a new scale was incorporated so it could grow inside the original sequence, a new organism growing inside the previous one. Photosynthesis was then the conversion process, the computing. The creation of sound and image across time would then become the creation of life, movement.